presentation, go ahead and let me explain who we are. We are a web design group. We are also focusing on some game design. What we're looking to do, our goal, is to create an online multiplayer game to take over the world! Or at least the world of online browser-based game development. So we chose to create a game because we wanted to create an interesting and fun product. Our research also showed that multiplayer games are appealing to the user on multiple different levels. There's a competitive mindset, there's a pervasiveness of the multiplayer gaming environment. Most importantly, there's unpredictability when you're playing against a human player as compared to a CPU who's already programmed. So there are two parts to CANJax. There is the CAN and then there's the JAX. To talk about the CAN, we have to go into HTML5. Now HTML5 is the latest revision of the HTML web standard put out by W3C. Those are the guys who make the internet. So W3C's latest version of HTML5 has a plethora of new features for web developers. Better organization for site development, just new features such as the canvas tag. Now the canvas tag is revolutionary because it allows developers to render and manipulate graphics within the browser with some HTML code. This is crazy because previously you needed Flash. And if you wanted to develop any kinds of interactive applications or animations for your website, you had to use Flash. And the problem with Flash is it's not always supported. There's a chance that it can break. The user has to install plugins and make sure everything's updated. Well, not anymore with Canvas. Canvas is supported across almost all modern browsers at this point, and it will always work all the time. Now, the second part of CANJax is, of course, the JAX, and that is AJAX. Now, normally, with JavaScript, you can program with Canvas to create some interesting applications. By combining JavaScript with XML requests, we can communicate with a database using asynchronous JavaScript and XML, a web technique that has been pretty popular in the new dynamic face of the internet. So our plan was to take HTML5, combine it with AJAX, and create a really interesting online multiplayer game and make big bucks, right? So we used a bunch of languages, and we found that there were two ways we could implement our game. There was the long polling method, and then there was the WebSockets method. In our long polling method, we had a number of coding languages that we used: MySQL, PHP, jQuery, HTML5, while in WebSockets, we use Node.js, jQuery, and HTML5. So the first implementation that we had of our project was long polling. Now, with long polling, how it works is the client will send information to the database using JavaScript. It sends an XML HTTP request, basically calling the database and telling it to change some information. After a certain amount of time, the database then uses the magic of the interwebs and updates other instances of the game in other client instances. Now, the way it all comes together is that in our game, what we see here is basically when you input a command such as go up, your X and Y coordinates will change. The information will be sent to the database. After a certain amount of time, the database will send that information to the rest of the instances of the game. You have a unique ID, so whenever you move your character, that information is updated in the database. So really, you're not actually moving the character. Instead, you're telling the database to move your character for you. Unfortunately, we found that it had a lot of lag time, a lot of latency. So we created our second implementation, our WebSockets implementation. Now, the way WebSockets work is we cut out the database. We have a middleman, and that's our WebSocket server. We send that information to our WebSocket server, and that WebSocket sends that information to the client and updates the database at a later time. So we don't wait for the database to get back to us. Instead, there's this bi-directional channel of communication that's very fast, very instantaneous. And already in our game, we have our WebSockets implementation, and we see visually the latency is a lot less, which is great news. And we found that there are some pros and cons. With long polling, you don't need to install anything on the server. WebSockets, you do have to install like something on the server on the administrator side. And of course, there is some lack of information in WebSockets, since it's kind of like that middleman. There's no database changing constantly. But right now, we have our long polling method. We've collected our data on a long polling. And as you can see, we have a total mean latency of 300 milliseconds. That's 0.3 seconds of latency with long polling. Every 10 seconds you're playing the game, you're lagging for 3 seconds. That's unacceptable in a game. So for the future, what we want to do is we want to gather information on our WebSockets method. And once we have the information, we want to compare that to our data for our long polling, see which one's better, evolve that, and make our game fun and playable. To conclude, we look forward to all of you guys playing our game. And if you want more information about how we developed and created our game, please come to our final presentation. Check us out. We're CANJax, and that was my Pecha Kucha presentation. Thank you.